turn the page.
It's in the front part.
I thought it was.
It should be, there's a tab on it.
There is.
Yeah. It says, I think it's the orange one.
All right. Notice of a workshop meeting of the Commissioners Court of Grimes County, Texas, Wednesday, July the 7th. It'll be convening immediately after the 9 a.m. regular meeting. The time for us to reconvene is 10:08. We're calling this meeting to order. We're at the 114 West Buffington Avenue. And we're here to discuss and review Grimes County FY22 budget, 2022 budget. What you have in front of you, Commissioners, is just very basic information, and I want to share with you, this is not a complete, by any stretch, proposal of what has been requested by our elected officials and or our department heads. What this, and Cinda or Jesse stop me at any time when I misstate, but in working with the auditors, what you have in front of you is a budget that has the 3% COLA in all of the salary lines. And also, Commissioners, you're going to see the 3% applied to your travel subsidy, okay? So all salaries are showing the 3% COLA adjustment. Also included in this is the increase on the insurance that we have already voted on and accepted through the court for the 2022 budget. Okay, the cost of living, the travel stipend, the insurance, and that also is applied to the retirement.
The increase for retirement is
Right,
also inclusive.
is also included in there. Okay, so those are three kind of major expenses, but if the money is available, then I plan to leave that in the budget to be considered of our employees and what the court has already agreed upon for the budget. The 3% is not going to make our employees whole, but it might take some of the pain away. The 3% that you're receiving on your travel stipend is not going to even be close, because as of last Friday, the AAA had stated that the average cost of fuel across the U.S. from the 4th of July weekend last year to the 4th of July weekend this year was increased by 42%. So that's fairly significant. You could just about figure a little more than $1 a gallon on the fuel cost. Also, what has been included in this budget is the additional investigator for the DA's office. So that is in here. We also have, so that gives them 3 investigators. Also included in this budget is the crimes victim services person. That's the second one that they have, but that was the one that was covered by the grant previously. And we made the commitment to the district attorney that if we didn't get the grant, we're still going to cover it, and it's going to be in the budget. So that salary has been taken care of. Also included in this budget have been 2 additional personnels for the maintenance department. And one of those would be a grade 5 roving maintenance person. And one of those would be a grade 4 clerical person. And the reason for those 2 additions is the anticipated increase in work that we will be engaged in with the new Justice Center Ultimately, we will vacate some of the buildings entirely, but we're not close to there yet. So we don't know what the downside, or the low side of that labor need is going to be. Also, the maintenance department, this in the 2022 budget is, the plan is to take over the hospital maintenance. However, let me clarify, the hospital is responsible for some of their own maintenance. And I don't know if they've hired a new person in-house yet or not, but they have been using the previous person who retired, but they're using him or her on a contract basis and as needed. But based on the initial review that Al Peeler has made of the hospital, there's a fair amount of preventive maintenance that the hospital has really not taken care of, that he feels it's important for us to get our arms around before it gets out of hand cost-wise. But to take care of his current load and his increased load, the grade 5 roving maintenance person seems to be justified, at least to me, at this point in time. Cinda, Jessica, are you aware of any additionals at this time that I've left out?
Yes.
Which are those?
The vehicle for the DA
Oh,
investigator
okay,
position.
you're right. And that was $37,000.
Yes. The property insurance, we went ahead and increased that by 30,000 because that was approved in Commissioner's Court as well.
What kind of insurance, I'm sorry?
Property,
Okay.
kind of like our county
Right, like our
homeowners.
homeowners, yeah.
The tax appraisal budget, that increased by 51,000, so we went ahead and put that in there.
How much?
We increased it by 51,000.
Our share is 51.
We increased it?
We increased our amount that's currently budgeted for this year by 51,000.
Okay.
So it's 500 and, let's see,
And I'm not able to make their budget meeting next week, but
500.
Jesse is making that in my stead.
Okay.
and so it's now budgeted for $531,228.
$531.
$31,228. We did make a couple of, so the salary, as the judge mentioned earlier, the salary includes the 3% with the increases in, with the respective loads, but also the increases that were approved in Commissioner's Court with insurance and retirement. But we left all the operating the same as this fiscal year, just so we could see, with the exceptions of the items that we just spoke of. We did also make a few reductions. We took all grants, the majority of the grants out right now, because if we're gonna have expenditures for the grants, we're gonna have the revenue coming in, so it offsets each other. Those will be added in, but with the time that we were given, we went ahead and just took those out for a clearer picture at this moment. The capital projects, which is Fund 49, we anticipate the building being completed by the end of this year, so we removed all of those expenditures out for next year. And then voters, in her, yes ma'am, sorry, I'll go slower.
Okay. In the capital projects, we did have renovations in there, so that's been removed?
So that's a great point. So we need to keep in the building and the storage building and the renovations. Yes, okay. I apologize for that. So the annex and storage building. Was there, the fiber we're hoping to have done by the end of this fiscal year. Was there anything remaining that because I only recall the storage building and the.
The rest was moving and
But
furniture.
that should be done before the end of this year, right?
We surely hope,
Okay,
but with the weather delays that we've had, the rain delays, of course, a lot of the work now is inside, so the rain's not gonna hurt us too much.
well, and if it comes down to where if we just wanna leave the annex and the storage building in there, we definitely can do that, and the further along we get, we'll have a better picture of our move-in date.
True.
And if we need to adjust it, we can adjust it at that
Okay.
time. So are we in agreement to add just back the storage building in the annex?
Building committee, commissioners, thoughts on that?
That's
Reasonable?
fine. What about the technology, the
The
Greg
tech-
stuff? Is
Yeah.
that's outside of this budget, or outside of the building's budget?
Are you talking about the fiber that was just
No,
discussed?
the other technology stuff.
The
that-
phone lines,
That's already in this year's budget. We've already expended, had some expenses. I would think that if we're planning on moving in by September, I would think that that would be finished as well. Because we have to have phones in order to operate. So as we get along, we can see where we're at and then adjust it, the numbers from that point.
I mean, I don't, certainly relying on Commissioner Mallett's assessment as well, but, I mean, we're gonna really be stretching it to get into that building by the end of
With
this
the weather
fiscal year.
continuing what it's doing, we just have to keep an eye on it. I mean,
Okay.
It's
So-
something that's coming out of, essentially coming out of fund balance, so
It
it can
is.
easily be
It
passed
is.
on to the next budget cycle.
Mhm. Yes, so it is, we can budget for the ones we know that are not gonna be completed, the storage building, the annex, the renovation of the annex. And the other ones, if we foresee that it's not, if we don't get to it before we adopt the budget, we can definitely bring that back to court because that was unforeseen. Because our anticipation move-in date, I thought, was at the end of September, but as that changes, we can change
Well,
this
originally it
number.
was in March.
Well, I mean now.
Yeah,
as-
but I mean, so.
Yes, yeah. So we can definitely change it because it's not using revenues right now, as long as we stay within that $12 million budget, it'll be using fund balance. So, okay, so we'll add those back in. Voters did turn in a reduced budget on their budget request, which we reduced, the machinery and equipment line because she no longer needs that equipment. I believe there was 120,
We reduced it down to 20,000.
but from 120,
Or 140.
40,000. So there was 142,000, we did reduce that down to 20,000,
What's
which
the
is
voters number?
427 on page 9.
I don't know if the new software did it, but thanks for putting page numbers on there.
That was all done. Yes, so we reduced the 142,000 to 20,000. And that was on her budget request, and that was just because it was a one-time expense, so that was a change. And that's it.
to be clear, can we go back to the DA?
Mhm.
Okay. So what I think I heard,
So page 10, it would be
Page 10.
page 10.
Yes, ma'am.
So what I think I heard that all three positions are in there. Is that what you said, Judge?
Investigator.
Well, there are 3 investigator positions, and there's Gilberta, who's the crime victims
Liaison.
liaison. Thank you.
She's in 489.
She's in 489.
She's with CDC, yes.
She's in 489.
Yes, so the 3 positions that you're looking at with the DA's office is they currently have 1 investigator. We then brought in John as a county paid employee because of the loss of the grant. So that gives them 2. So now the county's covering that additional 1. But then we added a 3rd investigator, which was your request, correct? To that, no matter if we get the grant. So if we do get the grant, there'll be 3 investigators and 1 case worker. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm not clear. If we do get the grant, which currently funds how many positions?
2.
Okay, if we get the grant, which currently funds 2 positions, what are you saying is happening? Just to be clear.
If you receive the grant, that currently it would fund Gilberta, but it would fund an additional caseworker, an investigator. Well, we had it titled as that.
So what I think she's asking is if the grant comes through, is the money that is funded for this third investigator, Gilberto, gonna be taken back out?
No, the third investigator, from my understanding, will stay in. Now
Okay.
Gilberto that money will be taken out and she would be grant covered from my understanding. But if that's incorrect, y'all let me know.
And an investigator will be, it's an investigator and Gilberto, right?
No.
We would take out the investigator and we would take out Gilberto.
You would take
But-
out the third?
Right.
Oh,
But
okay.
I thought we discussed in court that we needed that position regardless,
We are.
you
That's
know?
what she, I believe, is stating, is it'll be, we're funding it, but if we do get the grant, those funds, I guess, would.
So how do we
Back
deal
in
with
the-
it next year then, if you then in turn put it back on a grant? It doesn't
Still fine.
remain in the,
I
in the
think we
next
literally
budget?
have to do that and keep doing it.
So you guys were not anticipating on having 4 investigators then?
No.
If the grant, okay, then I misunderstood
Oh.
because I thought it was, you're gonna fund a third investigator no matter what. And if the grant comes through, then they get that 4th employee.
And I will say that that was the understanding I left the workshop with. was
And
that-
that's why I'm confused.
That's, my understanding was, and when I walked out of here, that we would fund the county would fund 3 investigators
Mhm,
and Gilbert.
mhm.
And the grant money would still be there, but they could use that to get a caseworker, but there would be no continuing commitment if that grant money runs out to fund that caseworker or whatever. They decide their needs are for the time of the grant. That's kind of,
That was the way I understood it, was the way you just said.
That was what was relayed to me. So you guys, how it's currently being funded right now in this budget is there's a third investigator and there is the crime victims liaison that funded by the county. That's how it is. There's no grant money in there right now,
Correct.
but if that's the case, then we need to somehow set up a contingency fund based upon if the grant is approved, this is what's gonna happen, this is how much money we're gonna need. If the grant is not, then this is what's gonna happen and move those funds.
I never understood the conversation that we would have 4 investigators.
Okay,
Now, if you and I had that conversation and you left my office with that understanding, I don't recall that, John.
You and I had a conversation about it last week, and I mentioned to you on the phone that the way I asked you what your intent was, you told me, and I told you on the phone that was not the way I had understood it, but I just didn't get into a lengthy discussion with it. I just kind of left it because I knew it was gonna come up today.
Okay.
But,
Well, I do recognize the need for that third investigator.
right,
And if we were to get the grant, then that third investigator would be covered by the grant. If we don't get the grant, Grimes County would cover that third investigator.
so if we do get the funding for the grant, then they will cover the investigator and the crime victims liaison.
Right.
But then the following year, if the grant, which you cannot commit to because we budget on an annual basis, but let's just say, worst case scenario, the following year, the grant is not approved.
That we, Grimes County, approve on our budget, the third
Okay, so you would,
investigator and Gilberto.
so you plan on taking those in as county employees?
That would be my intention in the direction I would think we would go with our expanded courtrooms and legal need.
good. Can I
Sir,
make-
you bet.
I think I don't think that's a bad plan. I just think that, the intention to do this with the district attorney's office to address the investigatory needs and the victims. These faces may change between now and the time that you are proposing if we use that grant fund to fund this investigator and crime victims. And I think it's significant enough, and I believe that this court fully intends and knows the significance of these positions. I think, it's just my opinion, but I think we fund them now. We let that grant be what that grant's gonna be for the next year, and then if it goes away, the next court, if any of the faces change, is not faced with the burden of, you know, this whole scenario coming up again. I mean, we still are in place, and even going back to the DA's office, we could say we funded those positions, so don't anticipate anything else coming down the road. That's just kind of,
Is there any way for us to fund it and then it's just considered a reimbursement, not a, how is it paid through that grant?
Well, it is a reimbursement grant. The issue with the investigator, and John can speak better to this, is that it's truly not in the grant written as an investigator. And how the grant is written, they have to do reporting, and there's a big administration side to it. And the caseworker has specific duties that I think their office was looking for an actual investigator. John, you speak to that. You would be better to, that would be your.
So I'll stand up here. What she's talking about, on paper, the grant is written for a crime victims liaison and a caseworker. And I've mentioned to y'all before when I've come that the caseworker is not even required to be a police officer. That is not their primary focus. Their primary focus is strictly grant stuff. So that position is hamstrung by the fact that a big percentage of their time has got to be doing these specific things, and some of it is, the intent of it is grant and victim relations. But the reality of it is, typical grant, there's all the bureaucratic stat keeping and quarterly reports and monthly reports and yearly reports and all the BS that takes up a bunch of time. So, and that's what I've talked to y'all about multiple times when I've come in here and talked about this, is I'm standing here with a badge and a gun on, but I can only spend so much of my time doing cop stuff, because if I don't do these things, then we're gonna lose the grant anyway. And that's why we keep saying we need somebody else who can come in and spend all their time doing cop stuff. I hope that's enough of an executive.
Well, that's why I was thinking that one extra person, but you did have that, but then we still had, go ahead and brought in 3 investigators.
Yeah.
Would there still be, that one investigator, if we do get the grant, could still take the time to do that, would you still be
Right.
sufficient to do y'all's job?
So, one thing that was mentioned, you two, you and Commissioner Dobianski were out the day of our meeting here. One thing that I actually talked a lot about that day was how much of our time is being taken up by technology. And I brought in that day a stack of 50 DVDs that went to one case. And one thing that actually got said that day, and I don't remember if it was Commissioner Cox or the judge or who said it, was perhaps if we got the grant, we could take that extra position for the time that we had it and use it specifically doing that, because it wouldn't require a vehicle. They could work at the office, because that's a whole part of that dynamic too, is for each cop position, you've got to have a vehicle. If you took a technology person and had them going through all of the videos and DVDs and computer downloads and phone downloads, that really takes, then we could use it for that. I mean, and that was just an idea that was talked about that day.
Well, would it be okay to have 2 investigators that are strictly investigating and then have, like you said, an administrative type person, and then,
Well,
and we could fund that person no matter what, it doesn't have to be a peace officer. And then whether we get the grant or not, it could still be that position to help y'all with that technology.
It would work best for our office if the county funded 3 police officer positions and then it used the grant money for the administrative
and that's what
victim
we
stuff.
talked about.
Okay.
So that the 3 people that were cops could actually just do cop subpoena serving, helping with cases, all that stuff.
And I'm looking at my notes. We talked about the county actually going ahead and hiring a position for an investigator, because it's hard to offer anybody a position based on a grant when you're trying to pull a law enforcement. Just saying you're only here for a year. That's hard to do.
I don't think we need to do that.
Yeah,
I think we
okay.
need to take advantage of the grant if we get it, but.
And we
But what
had that resolved, that we weren't gonna go out in my mind, we had to resolve that we were gonna hire a person.
A person, and we're gonna do a vehicle.
And we weren't gonna tell them, if we don't get the grant in a year, you're out of here. We said we'd get the third investigator, but it seems to me as a county that we'd wanna take advantage of grant money, even if that new investigator only got to spend half time investigating and doing the other half fulfillment of the grant. That still is a benefit to y'all, but it still saves us
That-
some amount of money.
That wasn't I guess, the discussion that I perceived us saying. We said we would hire an additional investigator because of the caseload that they already currently have. Now that we're opening the Justice Center, we're gonna be able to do the cases, that we needed to just look at hiring an investigator, not based upon the grant, because he's only gonna be able to do the work 50% or less for that time. We
Commissioner,
talked about the
that's-
grant.
That's what we did with John. We hired John full-time.
That was
put him-
ultimately the problem, because John could only do a
Right.
certain amount of work based upon what the grant required. We said we weren't gonna keep going down that road. We were gonna hire an investigator, put in a vehicle, and then if we got the grant, Gilberta would then convert back over to the grant, and we would have an additional person because of all of the stuff that we saw coming in. Now with the recorded videos, with going through people's phone, they needed another caseworker, not an investigator, to help them keep up with all of the stuff they're receiving between the sheriff department and their department as far as presenting the cases. It wasn't ever to fund another investigator. We said we ourselves would pay for an investigator, and the problem with trying to make it be a grant position was it removes him from doing the work that they really need done. The load that they're carrying is very heavy now. You know, he brought in all the stuff to demonstrate that. And from what I see in my notes, we said that we would fund a new investigator, an additional investigator, along with the third vehicle, and that the grant would, if we got it, Gilberta would then go back onto the grant, which is how we're gonna take advantage of the grant, and then an additional person to help with all of the hoopla that they're receiving as far as recordings and stuff like that. But to try to fund a fourth investigator was never my understanding, because along with that would have to be a vehicle.
Yeah, and what you just said is, and which is also what Commissioner Cox said a while ago, that's how I left understanding it, was that if we got that grant, that's what we would end up utilizing it for, was kind of the
Yeah.
technology stuff, and something that did not require a vehicle.
So,
Well, that's, I
so,
mean, so essentially, we're adding two positions.
If we get this grant,
Yeah,
which is,
yeah.
yeah. And that's.
Well, and I hate
and
to
that-
try to
and
do that based on if we get it, and that's a yearly basis. I mean, if that's the true workload that you needed, and where it's I mean, you're almost doubling what you were doing now.
At the end of the day, at the very least, our office needs 3 police officer positions. That's what we need. Regardless.
and that's what they asked for, Commissioner Mel, I'm not sure if I'm following you.
Well, I'm just saying, because beforehand, like last year, I guess while you were still on the grant, you still operated with 1.5 investigators.
Basically, that's exactly right. That's what I
So,
used to always
you know,
say.
we're basically gonna double our investigators and then have an administrator.
Yes.
And that's, I mean, with the caseload and the workload that you have, that's gonna warrant doubling our investigators. Is that,
Yes.
okay?
Yes.
But that third full-time investigator was gonna be a position we absorbed along with the vehicle. The other position did not require a vehicle.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, we're
and all
doubling,
of-
we're going from 1.5.
I'm just trying to make sure
that's what
I'm
saying,
hearing
we're
you
going from 1.5
correctly.
investigators to 3.
Yes.
With an administrator as a possibility. But if that's the true workload that we need, I mean, I think we should fund that administrative type person. If that's a true need to allow y'all to do your job,
Well, that's what we
Whether
have
get
in the proposed budget, is it not, the third investigator?
We have a third investigator and we have a CDC liaison.
Okay.
Yes.
But the county's gonna absorb those costs.
We have that using county funds.
Right.
And then the, yeah.
And so all what you're saying is if the grant is approved, Gilberta will move to the grant. And then they will have the ability to hire a caseworker that falls in line with the grant. And if the grant is terminated, then that caseworker will go away and Gilberta will come back to the county.
That is correct.
That's
Yes.
how I
Mhm.
understand.
But you guys need to be prepared that if we bring somebody in under the grant, that it's a one-year deal. And at the end of that year, because the big complaint the DA made here is, I got people buying houses and making commitments and all that kind of stuff, and you've made the comment to me, I can't in good conscience go try to hire somebody and they're only gonna be there for a year.
Absolutely.
So,
And like I
the,
said, I don't think we need to do that as well. I mean, if
Well,
if that's a
this
position
is
of
what we
need,
also discussed,
then I think
Commissioner
we should
Mallett.
hire it, and then
that-
take advantage of the grant the years we get it, but we still have those positions that we don't.
We talked about when this came up, when the money was missing from lack of not doing what we need to do. We talked about Gilberta being on the grant if we got the grant, but if we didn't, her position would become a permanent
That's what
position.
I'm still saying. I'm saying about the.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
No, and
I think
that's why I'm
sometimes
saying
we
also
talk
about
different
the
languages, but I want to make
No,
sure
I
I'm
mean,
understanding.
Well, and I'm.
If it's a true need, that we need 3 investigators, the administrative and Gilberta, then I think they should be budgeted through the county, whether we get the grant.
and that's what I've done. That's what's in your preliminary budget here.
So we're-
But that position, now, just to be clear, make sure I'm understanding
I
you.
don't want it to be a year-to-year position. I want it
Also.
to be funded through the county,
You're,
both of them.
Are you
But-
talking about Gilberta?
No,
Because
he's talking
Gilberta would
about-
then become that permanent person.
I'm talking about both of them.
he's talking about the caseworker and
The
that's
caseworker?
not what that's,
That's not what,
Yeah,
That's not
that's
what's in
what.
here. But like I said, I don't think it should be a year-to-year basis. So if the investigators, if we need 3 investigators, and we need a caseworker, and we need Gilberta, I think it should be
Well,
funded.
how about we take
Budgeted.
advantage, as far as the caseworker, my idea, or my thought was, or my thinking pattern is, you take advantage of the grant now to hire that caseworker. But should that grant go away, Gilberta is the one that's gonna be in that permanent position that
No,
we
I think
create.
she's a permanent position by herself, and then the caseworker.
So you're
needs to be
saying
a
you wanna
permanent
see her
position also.
permanently now?
No.
No.
Barbara, what I think.
There's two grants, 2 people positions for grants. I want those 2 positions to be funded whether we get the grant or not,
Aside from the investigator.
aside from the investigator.
And that's
If that's
where,
what
I
the true
hear what
need
he's
is, if we
saying.
truly need
I'm
3
clear on what I'm
investigators.
hearing that he's saying.
And I meant no disrespect, I just thought you weren't understanding me.
No, I'm clear on what I'm hearing him saying. I'm presenting or reiterating the idea that we're talking about funding 2 positions should, in the following budget,
Should the grant go away.
should the grant go away. Whereas right now, if Gilberta she's in here as a permanent employee right now. Should the grant come back, we said we were putting her back on the grant. Should the grant go away, she becomes a permanent position.
Yes.
Are we then adding another position on top of that position?
That's what-
I mean, we haven't gotten there, I don't
I mean,
think.
I think if it's a need, a true need, we need to do that.
Well,
I mean,
let's analyze this,
Yeah.
and so we built a $10.5 million building primarily because the courts needed more space to operate in. Because they claim they're going to have a lot more court based on their caseloads. You got three DAs,
Next week.
3 DAs.
Yes.
And each one of those DAs is gonna represent a different court, is the way I understand it.
Which is exactly why we ultimately need 3 cops, because what ultimately will happen is you'll have a attorney, a police officer, and a clerk that are working each of the 3 courts doing separate things.
And so, we also we've built and we are preparing for some anticipated growth based just on natural occurrences as well as other things. And so when you look at that picture and you take it as a whole, I think it's reasonable to assume that the crime rate, albeit we hate to admit it, is probably going to expand a little bit. But just to prosecute a case that's going to trial, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna go to trial. They may jump through all the hoops and do all the legwork and may use up tons of man hours, and they get to court, and the next thing you know, it's a plea, and all that stuff is for not, I don't wanna say nothing, but it gets us to the point of justice.
And it's definitely not for naught, and I can give y'all a really great quick example of that. A couple of weeks ago, we had a defendant named Robert Dorsch who was set for trial. He was number one for trial. He had assaulted his girlfriend, and.
We're being recorded, is that all right?
Yes,
Okay.
didn't realize we were.
But-
Oh, no, I mean, yeah, this is fine, he pled. So, he wasn't gonna plea, wasn't gonna plea, wasn't gonna plea, wasn't gonna plea. Well, there was a woman, and his mother and grandmother were both on scene and witnessed this assault. But when the patrol officer went out there, if they were protecting their family member, they wouldn't say anything. I ended up going up to Beat Ice, I talked to the grandmother myself. I've been doing this a long time, I'm good at interviewing people. I finally got her to not only admit that he hit the victim, but that he knocked her down in the process, as this 85-year-old woman gets between him and his girlfriend in a closet. Got grandmother to tell me where his mother was over in, right outside of Kirbyville, Texas, which is down there in Louisiana. And that night, I drove all the way over there, talked to his mama in the apartment, and finally got his own mama to admit that the assault happened. Didn't get home till midnight, 16-hour day. All of that to say, I sent that to his defense attorney, or our office did, through the attorneys. And 2 days later, that case pled, because at that point, a weak case had become a great case. So that illustrates what you're talking about, that it's not for naught what we're doing, because me spending that 16 hours and go seeing those two people saved the county probably 10 to 15 grand on trial for the court reporters and all the stuff that goes into that with Diane's office and everyone else. And on the victim side of it, I have a great story for the victim side of it. Just last night, I left the office yesterday, 4 o'clock, I had a doctor's appointment. Finally got home right at 5:45. I am pulling in the driveway and I get a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it. I thought it was another one of those damn robocalls. But I answered it for whatever reason. It's a girl named Kiana. She was a sexual abuse victim. We pled her abuser out to 25 years earlier this year. He'd impregnated her 3 times. It was an incest situation. She had remarried, physically abusive situation. He threw her out. She's homeless at a park using somebody's borrowed phone in Hearn, Texas. So I get back in the car, and last night I ended up driving all the way to Hearn to get her, to bring her back down here, to put her in a hotel, so that today Brenda's dealing with her and we're trying to help get her straightened out. Because even though her case is resolved, she's a victim of a crime. The reason she's having all these problems is because she was sexually abused from the time she was 12 until she was 15 years old by her uncle, who's now serving a 25-year sentence. So the amount of time that we are spending on these cases is significant, and I don't in any way feel like I have to tell y'all that y'all get your money's worth from our office. I mean, we are all, nobody's ever walking down there seeing somebody sitting around not doing anything.
Well, let me say this, I appreciate you updating us on that, and I want to be cautious on too much information maybe.
Well, those 2 cases are okay because they both pled out. The guys are both in prison.
I think we're all clear on the investigator position being a permanent position. That 3 investigators permanent, am I?
Yes,
Okay.
in the budget.
I think now what's in question is, what are we doing with the grant? Is that what I'm hearing? Grant or permanent on a casework?
I think the other 2 need to be, I think both of those need to be permanent as well.
I agree. And I agree with you because
And the auditor wants to say something.
we're talking about, I mean, those 2 positions deal directly with the people that he's talking about, from that tragic of a case to going down and a property crime, getting your house broken into. I mean, and those people are still victims as well. And there's a lot of rights that are extended to victims accordingly that they may not even be aware of. And if you have skilled professionals dealing with victims, the services that they can be provided may mean the world to them, such as going and getting them and putting them in a motel whenever they're homeless.
Jesse?
So when we budget for 1 year, that's it.
Mhm.
Because we can only commit to this 1 year based upon what our revenue stream is gonna be. And so I think at this time, I think next year, if we get the grant and we have this hired on grant caseworker and we have a hired on grant funded liaison, and next year when we're doing our budget, we find out those funds are no longer available, that's a conversation for this at that time. Because we're working with our revenues for this year, from October to September. And so I think the real question is, at this moment, for this next year's budget is, do you want to hire the third investigator with county funds, which is in your budget in front of you? We have the CVC liaison, and if the grant is approved, are you going to move the CVC liaison to the grant funded for that year, specific year, and allow them to hire on another caseworker? And if that's the case, that's the end of that.
Mhm.
That's for fiscal year 2022. And then when we get to the fiscal year 2023 budget process, that's where this conversation will be had, because you have no idea what your revenues are gonna be
Right.
at that
I
time.
agree there.
Well, that's the way it is a lot, every year, but if there's a true need that needs to, leave this position in order for them to do that's our job, is make sure
Definitely.
they have the personnel that they need to get the job done.
So you're saying add that caseworker to the county budget right now and to
And
fund
if we
it
get the
for
fund, we get the
fiscal
fund,
year
if not,
22?
it's still a position of need and.
So with so let's
Yeah.
just go this stream, with our revenue that we have anticipated as of yesterday, we are just with a 3% COLA, and we're waiting on our ad valorem, and we foresee a little rise in that number, but we're in a deficit right now.
Yeah.
And so let's,
It's 579 before we started adding back something.
But that's not adding everyone's request and operator to go ahead and say. I just wanted to make sure we're focused on this year's budget and what it is that y'all want to put in for this year, not
Well,
for a different.
Like Commissioner Cox mentioned, we're gonna have this up and running for the next fiscal year with the new Justice Center.
Mhm.
We should have court constant. So the caseload that they're gonna have is just gonna be tremendous.
Okay.
And I think it needs to be put in, and hopefully, that position, that one of those positions can kind of make sure that we're doing all our checks and balances to get the grant. Follow all the procedures from the sheriff's department, all the,
So I'm gonna just state this.
reports we need to put out and everything.
Just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, because I don't wanna leave this room with the wrong impression.
Yeah.
So for this year, we're going to have 3 cops, and then presumably the grant would come in. The grant would pay for Gilberto and the caseworker. And then at whatever point in the future the grant went away, then those 2 positions would just revert to the county. That's what we're talking about.
That's what I mean, because I don't.
That's what
I
he's
think you would-
proposing.
I would
That's
think-
not what we're
yeah,
all
that's what
talking
That's what
about.
I'm proposing.
Okay.
That's
And
what
I-
he's
and I think
proposing.
that's what, I think it would be difficult to find a quality person with, you're only guaranteed 1 year of employment.
That's what he's proposing, but I thought I heard the judge said, just in case the grant didn't come through, Gilberto's position has been added to the permanent thing, and an investigator has been added to the DA's office on a permanent basis.
Right.
Those 2 positions have been added. Now, looking at that permanently, but we didn't talk about adding a 3rd position permanently.
No, I wouldn't.
And we're already-
Discussion, yeah.
We're already way below what we're anticipating to receive right now. So, I'm kinda, I'm excited to know that we can absorb Gilberta's position permanently, and we can do, hopefully, all of this that's in here currently now. But if we can't, then I don't know if I'm on board for adding a third position permanently at this time, because we have so many other wants and needs. And we don't, and let us not forget, we've got a cap now. We've got a cap.
The
We haven't
3.5%.
forgot.
Well, I did.
No, I know. I haven't forgot, I'll put it that way.
Okay, there's a cap on this budget here.
So then you're saying that we'll have the 3 cops permanently.
Mm-hmm.
Gilberta would go to the grant, the caseworker would go to the grant.
She's in here
Oh,
permanently
she's
now.
permanent.
She's permanent.
She's in here permanently.
So the 2 grant positions would just be a 1-year deal, if we can utilize them.
Yeah, that's what my thought was.
Okay, and that's fine, I'm just trying to make sure I understand, that's what I walked in here thinking we were gonna do.
Wait,
So-
wait.
I think it
I'm
was,
worried about the fact of getting, hey, it's only a 1-year deal, what kind of person, it would be very difficult.
It is going to be.
Because that's a
You
sensitive,
can go back to.
It is gonna be
that's a
challenging
sensitive.
to hire
position.
somebody
Yeah.
for telling them that you can only guarantee them a job for a year, but it is what it is. I didn't come in here to be greedy,
Well,
our
if-
office is
if-
not trying to be greedy.
If Commissioner Walker really doesn't want to add that person,
Yeah.
would it still suffice your needs to have an investigator? And then if we get the grant, he could become the caseworker
Yes.
and still, it would devote part of his time away from the actual investigator, but would you still be able to keep your head above water for the caseload that you're probably going to have
John,
next
are
year?
you hearing what he's saying?
We could use your permanent investigator, still as a permanent investigator, but through the grant, we could fund that investigator
No.
as a caseworker. Similar to what you were saying, what you were,
Mm-hmm.
instead, because I just don't see how we can hire a person for 1 year. I don't.
That's why we're saying we want to hire a permanent
Commissioner-
but we've
investigator.
done it before.
I'm
Not with the
saying
grant
this will
money.
be a permanent investigator, but if we get the grant,
No.
he will be funded by the grant.
We don't want him on grant whatsoever.
I'm confused.
We-
Okay,
we-
can I try to clarify?
Can I just get this out my mouth?
You got it, you got it.
Let me get it out the mouth. We said a while ago, we've already dealt with the investigator. He is a permanent position.
I agree.
Okay, we're not trying to revert back to putting him on a grant if a grant comes through. What we talked about is, although Gilberta is in here as a permanent employee, should that grant come, we would utilize her for that funding for that year for Gilberta. But if we didn't, then she's in here as a
Can we
permanent.
not do that for the investigator as well?
I would not like to see us do that, because they're gonna need investigators that are dedicated
That's
to
why I'm
the,
asking, that's why
to
I
the
was asking.
DA's office, not to
That's why I'm
crime
asking if it's a
victims.
possibility,
Okay.
because I just don't think, if we're not gonna hire, I just think it's gonna be very difficult to hire a person for 1 year.
I agree, and so, I mean,
So, Harry, I mean, would
Please.
you go for work for 1 year? I mean,
let's.
That's your only
Let's
guarantee?
not consider the grant. What are we gonna do permanently for the DA's office?
That's what, yeah.
We're gonna hire
Yeah.
another investigator, and we're gonna have Gilberti in the budget.
Yes, sir.
That's what it is proposed now.
Yes.
Now, we've got this grant coming in here that we know, if we get it, is good for 1 year. I agree with your assessment that to find somebody to do intense, skilled work for that type of position may be difficult to ascertain or find. But I think what I'm hearing John say is that an admin person doing data entry type work or something similar may be the person that fits that bill for the grant. Is
Yeah.
that,
Yes.
is that,
Yeah,
It's.
and that's why originally I wanted the 3 investigators, the admin, caseworker,
So to
and
speak,
Gilberta.
so to speak to
On
your
a
question,
permanent term, but still.
this is what would be our preference. With every bit of that said, our preference would be that the county just fund 3 investigators and fund Gilberta.
Done.
If we get the 2 positions, we will deal with trying to hire somebody. If we try for a year and can't hire somebody because we only promised them a job for a year, then we did everything we could do.
But I would
if
hate
we-
for part of that grant money to go to waste, is what I'm saying, if that could be used to pay an investigator as a caseworker. If we can't hire somebody, then we'll probably lose the grant next year.
Well, I
If
think.
we can't hire somebody, would that be part of
I
the,
mean,
is that part of the?
we're gonna
deal?
do everything we can to hire
Right.
somebody.
But if we can't, would that grant go away? Potentially,
I
if we
don't
don't,
know.
if it's something we can't fund?
It's an
With the
annual
economy,
scoring.
there's probably a lot of people who would be willing to just have a job in general. And it's a matter of, I mean, don't you have retired law enforcement? Well, you have to have the vehicle and investigator. But I
Yeah.
don't, we've done it before, and it just so happened, they took a job knowing that it was a grant funded position and it could go away at any point in time. When it originally started, they took that job. It just so
How do you
happened
get
that
room
with grant.
service?
My mother.
Mom
So
comes to the
I
rescue.
think that it's a risk you take,
Well,
but
doctor's
it's,
appointment.
they took the job knowing that.
Yeah.
And it so happened that it got approved for 3 to 4 years and they felt like, okay, this is truly a needed position after that long of it being approved. So I don't think, will it be will your pool be smaller? Yes, but you're still gonna have a pool of people to pull from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so.
It'll definitely be easier than trying to hire a police officer, because, and that's what the conversation I had with the judge last week, we actually have a very good idea of who we're gonna hire. This is a very experienced person, he's one of the best investigators I know, but he works at another agency.
With the
I-
county, are you still in someone else? I'm sorry.
I'm not gonna comment
Can't
on
reveal
that.
that. Gotta go through the interview
But,
process.
trying to get somebody that's a police officer that's experienced and still active to leave another agency to come here under that circumstance, I think is tantamount to impossible.
Oh, yeah, no, I wouldn't want that.
But when you're not hamstrung to needing to hire a police officer, and you're gonna hire somebody that's gonna do more administrative tasks and maybe work with our digital stuff, because you can teach anybody how to do that kind of stuff.
Most anybody.
Yes, sir, that's fair. That helps a lot. I mean, and we'll do the best we can, but at least we will know at the end of the day that the core people that we absolutely need to just function, that we don't have now, at least that will be taken care of.
I think this preliminary budget here, with 3 investigators for 3 ADAs, crime victim service person full-time to help out Brenda in her business, we've got the current needs covered.
Yes, sir.
And if we get the grant, then we go find 2 other people or 1 other person to help us, and we can give her to covered by the grant. If not, she's still covered under what we have budgeted.
And we would be fine with that. That is fine, because the court has said to us since March, when all this grant stuff started, after we lost it, that there is no question in anybody's mind that Gilberto will always have a job. So.
Well, we can't guarantee that, but
The position would be a
The
county budget position.
position will always be funded.
that's right.
So, if that's what y'all wanna do, that's fine. And then the caseworker position will just be, we'll have it while we have it, and if something happens, then we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
And by next year, if we determine that we need it, then we figure out how to put it in the budget, we're done with it.
Yes.
I'm okay with that.
So Giverta is permanent.
Unless the grant is received, then we'll have the grant money to cover her position, but for that year, for the
The
grant.
position is in the budget.
But the position
Okay.
is currently in the county fund budget
I
because
get that part.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
she's permanent as of right now. If the grant funding is approved,
Okay, there you
she's
go.
going
I wish I would
to.
quit using the word permanent.
Okay, she's currently in the proposed
Thank
preliminary
you.
fiscal year 2022 budget.
Okay,
If
somebody
the-
recording this?
Yes,
Okay.
if the grant is approved, then she will roll over to the grant-funded position. And they will have the ability to hire a caseworker.
But with the caveat at the end of this grant, if it's not renewed or approved, that her position will then again be absorbed by the county.
Y'all have already
If we
said that
can't do
in
that.
March, that
That's
you would
correct.
absorb that
That's
position.
correct.
Yes.
So you will have to But you cannot tie up those the next
I
year's
got it.
county fund.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's y'all's
But the intention.
intention.
So are y'all, since that seems to be quasi-settled, are y'all gonna talk about the operating lines today? Is that part of y'all's discussion?
No, John,
No.
I don't really know.
Okay.
Okay.
No?
No.
Okay. All right.
Are you done?
Y'all
What is the
call me.
operating line? What operating
I just told you to
line?
listen, I brought.
I know,
work.
well, you-
Just bring him a drink, it'll be all right.
What I was gonna say about the operating, the one thing that I know that'll have to be in there because of the vehicle is some more money for fuel. That's all I was gonna say about the operating.
Okay. He can siphon it out of your car. Or she.
Thank you for making us aware of it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
But I did ask, does the 37,000 call for tricking out the vehicle, and you said, yes, it does.
It does, yes, that's the vehicle and the stuff that goes in it.
And what department is the DA's op 430?
Yes,
430.
page 10.
So, page 10.
Yes.
So anyway, commissioners, that's what I have in your budget. I didn't know it was gonna be this easy.
But it needed to be clear.
That's fine. Commissioner Cox, you have a discerned look on your face.
Thank you, Judge. Are we gonna have another discussion or more discussions with regard to the budget? And the reason I'm asking is
Absolutely.
because there are other things. I know you're doing your best to incorporate some of these big ticket items, but there are some other things. I mean, I'd like to open another discussion up about. We don't necessarily have to do it today until we get some better reporting, but
What- and let me tell you my plan, because I absolutely hate going to the district clerk and saying, we're not gonna give you this, we're not gonna give you this, we're not gonna give you this, because we don't have the money. And then she gets all upset. And then I get the final numbers, or the good numbers from the tax assessor, the district tax office, and they go, hey, we found a pipeline company that changed the direction of the flow, and we have now got an additional $1 million. And then I go back to the district clerk and I say, hey, we're able to give you this and this and this, and she says, well, good, let me pull the pins out of the voodoo doll now. So I don't mind being pinned on the voodoo doll, but what I don't want to do is frustrate our leaders of the county right now until we get some better information. However, if you want to right now, or we want to schedule it for another workshop, have some key priority items in your mind, I'm glad to take those down, or if you want to just deliver them to me, I'll prepare a list. And, then, because once we find out we can cover our shortfall, hopefully, and then we have all of those priority needs, we as a court can say, this is the most important, so that's the next thing in. And we do that until we run out of money.
yeah, right now, I don't want to minimize any request, but one of the things that comes to the forefront of my mind right now is that the sheriff's department has made some significant requests. And I
Yes.
think we need to,
And I actually had, in all fairness, I had a meeting yesterday with the auditors, with Cinda and with Jesse specifically, or that was one of the specific items that we talked about. Let's see where the comparisons are, because we've been slammed by our neighbors when it comes to the law enforcement.
sure,
So that's gonna be a priority issue.
thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Do you think you could, since those pipelines aren't capped, can you get them to look at that, make sure we got the right direction?
I asked them, is it still flowing in the right direction? And the answer was yes.
Okay.
So, is there any further discussion?
Okay, just for my clarity. So when the tax appraiser comes back in around about the
July 25.
25th, the numbers he's gonna present to us will have the 3% cap on them?
3.5, yeah.
3.5% cap on them already? Okay.
And if push came to shove, we still have a penny left over from last year.
That we were supposed to be able to roll over.
If it's
this year,
needed.
if the revenue, but just keep that in mind, that that's a one-time deal.
Mhm.
And so when looking at this and preparing it, if push came to shove and you needed that penny, make sure it's not due to adding perpetual expenses.
Right.
Because then you're gonna have to adjust that tax rate or dissolve some positions. So it's, you know, that just.
See, if they're not permanent, we can dissolve them.
All right, so this is homework.
Yes, well, there's just a
Well-
kind of, again, a lot of it hasn't changed, but there's some additions with the salaries and all that in the automatic increase. And if push came to shove, do you have a bottom line number for the 3% COLA?
It's
What
on
it-
your last page.
Okay,
So, page 32,
yes, ma'am.
there is a box that says various other payroll-related adjustments.
Right.
And so you have it shows you how much the cost when approving
Gotcha.
the insurance and the.
319, okay. So if we really came up against a situation, Commissioner, we, as a last ditch, we could say, we're not gonna do a 3% COLA. And now we have 319 that we put in, back into the budget to take care of.
Because there are other expenses, like if you're adding 2 personnel to building maintenance, I would assume you would probably need to add a vehicle or have someone, if someone is trading vehicles or you're approving that trade, auctioning vehicles, I'm sorry, then maybe they could be traded to him.
So we didn't put in a position, a vehicle for the roving maintenance? Is that
No,
right?
because I already have some vehicle in there, and I
Okay.
don't think it was necessary at this time.
Okay.
We got one, they got one for Road and Bridge, right?
Yeah,
I think
Yeah,
they're
but I
good.
haven't heard too good things about that.
Yeah,
No.
I don't think
It's
it's.
not too
mass
much.
repair, but,
yeah.
I mean, I think there's other vehicles throughout the county that probably could be utilized for.
What did they do with the
we
vehicle
have
if we
to
did
buy
away
them
with
from
the
them.
Sam's position? That vehicle?
I'm not going there.
That one got redistributed, and then by the time we got to the bottom of the list, that's the one Al got.
Okay.
And it's definitely at the bottom of the list. Okay?
Put them in a cruiser.
COLA would be somewhere about.
If there's no other comments or discussion, we'll go to agenda item number 3. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
There's a motion before the court on agenda item number 3 by Commissioner Walker, seconded by Commissioner Dobianski. I'll make a comment in further discussion. Commissioners, I appreciate your comments today. And again, I'm open to any comments that you need or submissions or priorities that you want to push on the budget. Please keep me informed.
Yes, sir.
With that, if there's no other comments, yes, if there's no other comments, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're adjourned. Time is 11:15.